Welcome to Leaders and Loggers, the podcast that quenches your thirst for leadership knowledge one pint at a time. Grab your favorite brew, sit back, and join us as we raise a glass to the world of leadership. I'm your host, Kevin Dawson, and each week we'll bring you refreshing conversations with leadership experts from around the globe. We'll dive into the minds of CEOs, thought leaders, and change makers, sipping on the secrets of their success. From the boardroom to the brewery, our guests share their unique perspectives on what it takes to lead in today's ever-changing world. Well, welcome to the Leaders and Loggers podcast. I am your host, Kevin Dawson, and today I am joined by my friend, Brian Abel. Brian is a relational intelligence expert, a keynote speaker, author of the upcoming book, Toxic Breadcrumbs, and founder and CEO of Toxic Minds Media. And I've got to know Brian recently in Fort Worth with our mutual friends, Brian and Gabrielle Boucher. And I got to sit down and hear a little bit of Brian's story. And it was just so impactful to me and what I was really dealing with at that time, still a little bit, that selfishly I wanted to have Brian come and share his story. And I think there's a lot that Brian brings to the table that as leaders we can learn from, especially when it comes to relationships in the mental health space. Brian, welcome to Leaders and Loggers.
Kevin, thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so excited, and today the beer that I have is one that is out of this world. It is from Starbase Brewing, which is the official brewery of Mars, and
Okay.
it is called Of Kolsch, I Still Love You. And it is a honey Kolsch-Style Ale from Starbase Brewing, which is obviously down in South Texas, where SpaceX is headquarters. So cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Nice and sweet. Definitely an out of this world beer.
I will have to try that one.
Next time you are out this way in Texas, I will take you out for one.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Well, Brian, I would love for our audience to hear some of your story. I know you shared some with me, but for those who don't know who you are, would you mind just sharing your story with us?
Absolutely. So, once again, my name is Brian Abel. I am a relational intelligence expert, and what that means is I'm interested in toxic relationships. I am interested in relationship dynamics, how people communicate. Relationship intelligence is kind of a spinoff of, of emotional intelligence, but it's more tailored to how people communicate and how effective they communicate. And I kind of happened into this somewhat by accident a number of years ago. By trade, I work in healthcare. I'm a registered nurse and I work in mental health. However, I had a very short but very intense relationship um, with a partner that ended very abruptly. This relationship was back in 2019, and it took me a long time to get through it. It was a relationship that almost destroyed me, and you could say that she was on the narcissistic side of the spectrum, a lot of narcissistic tendencies. And before then, I knew what narcissism was. I studied psychology. My first bachelor degree in college was psychology. So of course, you hear narcissism, and these days narcissism's kind of thrown around a lot. Oh, I think that person, they're narcissistic, they're self-absorbed, they're narcissistic. Well, it goes a little deeper than that. And unfortunately, well, now I look at it as fortunately, I learned some lessons that I never wanted to learn. I This very short but intense relationship um, guided me down a path of curiosity. It guided me down a path of pain, but it also brought me to where I am now. And I always like to say what I learned from this was, and this is actually the title of the first chapter of my upcoming book, Breadcrumbs. And the first chapter is titled, I never knew that people this horrible actually exist. And they do. So I have come a long way since then, but it has now brought me to the point where I want to help others. want to help others go through the process of healing, a process that I didn't have any help with. I went through therapy and I had, certain resources, but it takes a lot more than therapy. It takes a lot of understanding. And also, it takes recultivating your own sense of self worth and self value. And that's what I focus on quite a bit and quite heavily is how important it is to have a strong, rock solid sense of self worth and self value, because that's what helps you mitigate and pretty much stop those self defeating behaviors and relationship patterns that keep you connected with individuals like that. So that's kind of my story and how I got to where I am now.
Like I said, when I heard your story the first time, here's a little insight what was going on in my world of why this hit so close to home. So very much like you, I was in a very intense relationship. Was married for about 2 years to a woman who, I loved deeply, but a lot of trauma and issues there that created issues. And you talk about narcissism, and I think when we typically think about narcissists, there's that picture of they're very controlling. They're never wrong. That very vocal narcissist. I was dealing with a quiet narcissist, someone who you didn't typically see those signs of. Well, wait, no, it wasn't until somebody goes, "That's narcissism," when I was describing it, and it really kind of caught me off guard when they said that. And even the effects of all of that, just like you, I lost a lot of my self-worth. I lost, a lot of my self-confidence because of that. And so I went on this journey to get that back. In fact, while we were in Fort Worth, unbeknownst to only Brian and Gab, I was dealing with my wife or ex-wife at the time, who was in a behavioral health facility after have gone missing 2 weeks before, and
Wow.
and dealing with all of that while working with everybody there in Fort Worth and having to break away every once in a while to go deal with that, and just the intense emotions and feelings that came with that. And so when your story, I'm like, this is my story. And I'm like, I gotta talk to Brian. I have to understand more, because I know we're not the only ones that have had to deal with that in such a personal way. Because I know that there are leaders who deal with that in the corporate world, where you get promoted or you get put on a team with somebody who is a narcissist, and that working relationship can be so intense that it just drains you and burns people out. And so, what I'd love to just kind of talk with you about is, in your story of coming out of that and helping people, what are some things that you have found that help people who may be in the same situation that you and I have been in?
Well, you make a really good point, Kevin, when you say we're not the only ones. And that's the thing is that being a being a victim of narcissistic abuse or a, a toxic person doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you are a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're in a workplace. It doesn't matter if you're in a personal relationship. Now, the thing is that lots of times we find ourselves in these relationships unbeknownst to us. We don't realize what we're getting into. We find somebody, and in my particular situation, I found somebody who was very charming, um, grabbed my interest right away, also started to overshare very quickly. I learned a lot of things about her personal life that normally you don't think that someone would share the first time you're meeting them. For example, oh yes, I take these antidepressants, and oh yeah, I am going through a divorce, and my father hasn't really been in my life, and just things like that, just oversharing. And then comes the love bombing. You know, within a couple of weeks, it's like, yo, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, where have you been all my life? Well, I don't know what I would do without you. And that continues for a little while. And they put up this facade. They put up this image of them being a wonderful, caring, kind person. But research shows that someone can only put up an act like this for about 6 to 8 weeks. That facade is going to that mask is going to fall off pretty quickly, and that's what happened. But what happens is what starts to form is a trauma bond, and a trauma bond is, I'll get into a little bit more of that as we go, but you become physically and emotionally addicted to this person because this person sends you through a vicious cycle of love bombing and then discarding. Like I said, it starts with the, I love you. I don't know what I would do without you. Next day, you know what? I don't think I could talk to you anymore. I don't think we're meant to be together. And as this goes on back and forth, so basically you're getting these dopamine hits, getting these hits of dopamine, this good feeling, this gratification, but it's pulled away so quickly. So it develops this trauma bond that they say is harder to break than a heroin addiction. And that's what happened to me. And it had never happened to me before. And it was all happening to me unbeknownst to me. I wasn't ready for this. I did not know the red flags to look for. And I just thought, okay, you know what? I can handle this. I can make her love me. I can show her that I am of value to her. I can do for her and I can try to do things to make her life better and fix the problems that she has. And anything that comes up, Brian is there. Brian is the knight in shining armor, kind of like we've talked about before. What I didn't realize was I couldn't. I couldn't. I could keep going, but nothing that I ever did was going to be enough. And I didn't realize until the end of this relationship what I was dealing with. At the end, it all became clear that this person never loved me in the first place. She was using me for her fuel. She was using me to get what she wanted, and she had no empathy for me at all. Unfortunately, in toxic relationships, you are often dealing with people who have no empathy, who don't know how to empathize, they don't know how to love, they don't know how to communicate. And I think that's the most important thing to understand when you're going through a relationship with somebody like you were and like I was. And it's a really, really tough thing. And that trauma bond at the end, that's what leaves you so broken. This relationship put me in a very dark place, and it almost destroyed.
Yeah, I mean I can relate to a lot of that. Of wanting to genuinely try to help and be the knight in shining armor. I told our friend Eric Mack, I said, yeah, I was being Captain Save-A-Ho, and
That's exactly it. You said it. You said it, not me.
I and I think I'm saved in his phone as Captain Save-A-Ho.
I think you are actually. I think he showed me that. It's either Captain Save-A-Ho or Rescue Ronnie. So and and it's
but
the truth though.
and I think for a lot of people who genuinely come from a good place of, hey, I want to help people, unfortunately, because we don't recognize the red flags. And I was listening to a podcast recently where the guy was interviewing a whole bunch of different women, and it was all about dating. And beyond red flag, green flag, I learned way more about flags that day than I ever did watching Fun with Flags with Sheldon and Amy on The Big Bang Theory. And but I would love for you to kind of just share your thoughts on what are some of those red flags, that we need to be aware of, whether it's personal or professional.
So uh, I think some of the major red flags are some of the things um, that I just kind of mentioned. Red flags are someone who, what number one, overshares really quickly, gives you a lot of information that you're like, wow, that's interesting. I don't really know you though. There's a reason behind that. Um, and other red flags are someone who is displaying love and affection and pronouncing their love to you, proclaiming their love for you so very quickly within days, weeks. As you know, as you and I both know, love is something that's cultivated. Love doesn't, you don't fall in love with somebody overnight. Um, Someone that is idealizing you, puts you on this pedestal. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't know what I would do without you in my life. Where have you been? This is going to be, it's going to be so different with you. But then another red flag is after this, the shift that happens so quickly to what we call the discard. It's like, and that's where I got the name Toxic Breadcrumbs for my book, because what these people do is they throw you little breadcrumbs of affection, just enough to keep you there, and then they pull it away. It's like, I don't know if you're familiar with Charlie Brown and the football. The
Yeah.
hanging the football, right, dangling it
Yep.
over you. Well, in a book that I've read by Dr. Patrick Carnes, that's called The Betrayal Bond, says, well, you know, when they're dangling the football over there over your head, and they're playing this game, and they're doing the intermittent, love bombing, discarding. What's the best way to get it to stop? No more football. So basically, then that's when you need to start to withdraw, start to pull yourself away. But that is so hard to do because you don't realize what's going on. If I would have thought for a minute that what I was going through was a narcissistic victimization, I would have pulled away. But I was so my self-esteem was so low, Kevin, that I felt if I did not have this person in my life, I was going to die. I didn't know what I was going to do. I don't know. I didn't know how I was going to move forward. I had in my head that this is the one, and somehow she's going to change. Somehow it's going to be better. It doesn't get better though. The cycle continues. There are also things that you find pieces of truth that are missing, or what you think are truth. Subtle little lies. There's even something as subtle as turning the phone on the table. Turning the phone over, always having their phone on them. She would get up and go to the bathroom, take her phone with her. And it's just little things that I didn't even think about until the end. One day I was glancing and she was texting somebody, and then she put like a little heart and a kiss emoji. And it didn't even occur to me that, oh, maybe she's just sending it to her son or something like that. Oh, no, she wasn't. She was sending it to somebody else. So even little things like that you wouldn't even think, or that, you know, that they don't really mean anything. Well, they do. They do. Because if the lies that are started in this situation, if the lies that she's telling you, she's telling them to other people too. Narcissists have a whole they have a whole batting lineup. They have a whole list. They have a whole lineup ready, just in case they got the next person set up. And I didn't realize that. And I was cheated on countless times, unbeknownst to me. And once again, not until the end did it really even click. So if you can just go into your relationships, personal relationships, and it's a shame we have to do this, but if you can go into relationships in the back of your mind looking for these cues. And these days dating is so hard because people are, people don't know how to communicate. People are, we're very untrusting. It's horrible. The dating world is a mess right now. So those of us that have been through this are naturally on guard. But these are some of the things that, when you do find the courage to open yourself up again, these are some of the things that you need to look for. And some of these things that make you think, well, this just doesn't feel quite right. How is she in love with me after a week? these little, what you said yesterday and what you're saying today, it's not really lining up. Now, I'm not saying, you know, always be on the guard thinking that you're always going to be lied to, but you have to be keenly aware of these things. And that's what I would recommend and strongly advise anybody in this day and age moving into any sort of personal relationships. And we can talk about the professional side of it too, because it does filter into work as well.
Yeah, it's such an interesting dichotomy that how a lot of the things that affect us in our personal life also follow us into our professional life. It's like, people talk about we got to have this work life balance. Well, sometimes work and life just collide because we're humans. You sometimes just can't separate, or some people won't separate those things. And there's been such a emphasis with the organizations that I've worked with over the last decade where we talked about the importance of emotional intelligence. Some have gone as far as talking about relational intelligence. Uh, Being in the roles that I've been in, sales, uh, relationships matter.
They do.
Whether you're selling or being sold to, and just as much as narcissists are very present in the dating world, it seems like they're more prevalent in the corporate world, and we'll try to leverage that to get what they want. And whether you are being managed by one, are one, or being sold by one, you go look at the end of the day and go, what just happened?
And I hear from a lot of people who say that they were, I've talked to a lot of people recently who say, who have shared with me that they haven't been the victim of a personal narcissistic relationship, but one that is in the workplace, where, where they were, the way they were treated and the way that things were handled, um, was completely similar to the way you would find somebody who is just very unempathetic and willing to get what they want through any means possible in the workplace. And the interesting thing about toxic relationships is that someone can take their own, they always say, hey, when you get to work, leave your personal issues at the door, right? Kind of hard to do. Like you were saying, work-life balance. It's not always so easy to leave it at the door, like you were saying. I mean, just in Fort Worth, you were dealing with something on your own, which of course we had no idea, but you know, you had to you had to handle things while you were working, per se. And it's hard to do that. But the problem is that when someone is in a personal relationship that's toxic, whether they are the victim or not the victim, it's going to spill over into the workplace. And what it's going to do is it's going to impact overall workplace culture. It's going to impact productivity, and it's going to impact corporate well-being. It's going to impact the entire vibe of of the workplace, of the corporation, of the organization, and it can make it a very toxic place. Um, like we were talking about, as far as a toxic work environment, and I think we've all been in toxic work environments. I work in healthcare, and healthcare at times can be very toxic with, you know, people that you're working with people that you're working for. And a lot of this stems from what they're bringing in from their personal lives into the workplace. So I think there's a lot to be said for corporate wellness initiatives that focus on mental health and the impact of emotional wellness of employees as it relates to how it's going to affect the culture at work. And I know that a lot of corporations focus on corporate wellness and workplace wellness and mental health, but I'm not sure how much attention is paid to, how is home life filtering in to the workplace. And I think that that's a space that really needs to be explored. And I think that there's a lot of work that can be done there.
Oh, wholeheartedly. It's interesting when I see people who are working in toxic workplaces, because that's where I kind of got my start in leadership development, was working with employers like, hey, we have so many issues here. We don't know what's driving, our retention issues, or, we've got high turnover. I'm like, well, let's take a look at it. And in interviewing people, it's like, oh, we have a toxic manager. We have a toxic environment because we've allowed these things to take place. And to get them through that is very similar to the same journey of personally getting out of toxic relationships, because it is painful at first to have to go through and address the pain, the issue. You can't just kick it down the road. I
No.
remember talking to a group that I was a part of to kind of help process a lot of the grief and the loss going through divorce. And the group leader shared, like, he said, you need to give yourself at least a year to process all of this before you entertain any type of new relationships, do anything big, because if you try to interject with another relationship or drugs, alcohol, sex, some people putting it putting all their time and energy into work, all you're doing is just pushing things to be addressed later and never take the time to actually heal. And which, to me, hearing that was like, okay, I got to really pay attention to this, because for me, it's like I could easily fall into that work trap.
Sure.
Let me be busy all the time to make up for the lack of that validation that I once had.
Right. And you hit on a really good point there of the fact that you need to take time to heal. And this is something that I had to learn to do too, because I thought, oh, maybe if I just found somebody else, I would just get over her. But it doesn't really work that way. And one of my favorite quotes, and I'm not sure who coined this, was, if you don't heal what hurt you, you're going to bleed all over people that never cut you.
Ooh, ooh, that's good.
And that really, really hit home for me. And at first, I thought it was just directed towards, people who are the ones that are the narcissistic type. I think it, it really could apply to them, but I think it applies to any of us. We go through something and we're not fully healed. If we're not fully healed, if that wound isn't fully healed, we're just going to bleed all over the next person. People, and that next person didn't hurt us,
Yeah.
you know? And that's what I do. I mean, I not only do I work with individuals, but I work with organizations too, so that they can mitigate, this sort of thing and improve their quality of, well-being in their corporation. Because, like we were saying, the toxic relationships don't just end at the door to the office building, right? So I think that, you know, getting the help that you need on a personal level is important, but I think helping organizations and corporations understand the necessity and the need to address this is vital to improving retention, improving culture, improving productivity, and also making your employees feel heard and supported. I think that's huge if we're talking about leadership, because I think that's lacking in a lot of organizations.
I agree. Now, I want to shift a little bit. We talked about, what has happened. So, how do we heal? Since we kind of started moving in that direction. So, how do we heal from this? What are some things, whether your journey or things that you help others go, okay, we've recognized, we've been here. How do we heal and get back to who we were, get our self confidence, get our self love back?
I think there's a few answers to that, and one of the most important things, and I know it was really important for me, was those of us that find ourselves in these relationships, something something happened to us at some point in the past. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, people say, "Oh, I came from a great family. My parents were the best parents," and I can say that too. I mean, I can say, "Hey, my parents were wonderful. They gave me a great childhood." I can't pinpoint something, but somewhere in our past there had to have been something that happened to us that really left an imprint on our development. And for me, I figured out what it was. It wasn't something that my parents did, but I realized that a lot of my self-defeating relationship habits and patterns have been due to fear of abandonment. And I remember it goes back to when I was 2 years old. And I don't know how I remember this so vividly, but my parents went on a vacation and they left us with a nanny from one of those old nanny services. This was back in like the late 70s, early 80s. And my brother was just a baby and I was about two. And I remember vividly this nanny just being horrible to us, just screaming at us and yelling at us. And my grandfather wanted to come and take us out for the day and she wouldn't let us and she wouldn't let him in. And I don't remember that part, but I just vividly remember being screamed at and knowing mommy and daddy aren't here. And I think that that was something that has more significance to me than I ever thought. So it, we all have we all have this origin story, I think, something that happened to us in the past. So I think the first step is to go back and this is where I feel, coaching can really help because it allows you to have someone guide you back through those painful feelings and recognize, well, where did this all start from? So I think it's really important to get to the bottom of it, reverse engineer where this all came from, how this happened. So that's what I did. I was able to identify, well, where was that moment for me that gave me these this fear of abandonment that I've carried with me through into my adult life. And a lot of my behaviors and patterns in relationships, they haven't changed because this is what I carried with me. So I think the first step is recognizing that. Where was that wound? What happened? And then it's really important to work on addressing it and addressing that fear of abandonment and addressing how it's playing into your relationships now, how it's playing into your dynamic as an adult. Because what we really need to do is we need to reparent that inner child who is hurt. And that's what a lot of people have a hard time doing that they don't really understand is that they're never going to move forward unless we're able to reparent that hurt, scared young kid that's still inside of us. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is to define boundaries for yourself. Take a step back and think about, what do I need? What do I want? Because I know in this relationship, I didn't even think about what Brian wants or needs or what Brian's expectations are in relationships or what my non-negotiables were. But it is imperative that you do that. And I learned that I needed to do that. I call it my three lists: my wants list, my needs list, and my expectations list. What do I want? What do I need? Because, Kevin, we all have needs, whether we think we do or not. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm okay. I'll figure out what I need later. But no, we have needs that need to be fulfilled now. And it's we're not selfish for admitting that. I think we're not doing ourselves justice by pushing that to the side. So what was helpful for me was to create these lists of wants. This is what I want in a relationship in my life. This is what I need. I need someone that's going to communicate. I need someone that's going to meet me in a partnership together. I need somebody that is going to love me as much as I love them, that is going to contribute and match effort. But these are also my non-negotiables. These are what my expectations are. This is what I won't put up with. This is what I will no longer allow myself to do. And I say, this is what I'll do This is what I'm going to do, what I'm going to set forth for me so that I no longer allow anything toxic in my life. And what that does is that helps facilitate and cultivate that renewed sense of self-worth. And it's still a work in progress for me. I'm not 100% there yet, but that's okay. But I am leaps and bounds farther than I was almost 5 years ago. Because I didn't even take any of this into consideration. So I think it's really important that we define who we are. We are comfortable with who we are. We are confident with who we are, and we know what we want. We know what we'll settle for. And I think that those are the first initial steps and probably the most important things that people can do to start to move forward and move past that the hurt and the pain and get themselves in a position where they're not going to set themselves up to accept that again in the future.
I love all of that, and in my own personal journey and dealing with all the things that I've like, I'm at that point where it's like, okay, I have my boundaries set. I understand, hey, this is what I want, this is what I need, and these are my expectations, because I didn't really have those in place prior.
Right.
In previous relationships, I've learned like, okay, these are some things I need to look out for, but it didn't always hold to that expectation or give myself the authority to hold myself to those expectations. I think that is where a lot of people are like, I don't, do I have the authority to do that? Well, yeah, it's you are the authority.
Yeah.
And and to go back and heal, that inner, like, very much like you trying to think back to what was that initial moment. Our friend Laurel Weirs, who has been on the
Yeah.
podcast recently, in our conversation, talking about getting back to when was that first time you felt this specific block, in addressing that. Because I think a lot of times we go, well, how does something that happened to me when I was a child affect me today? And go, and to me, it still like blows my mind going of how much what happens in childhood development plays into how we respond and act as adults, which as a parent freaks me out.
And it is, and it's so important because what happens to us as children leaves that initial imprint on our developmental plan and our developmental, you know, I'd like to say, our syllabus for the way we're going to go through that course of development. It leaves, it dictates where we start from. And it's very important to get to the bottom of that because if you don't figure that out, the progress isn't going to be made because you're not going to know what you need to address. That's that's as simple as it is. And our friend Laurel is very wise, and she's been doing this a long time, so I would listen to her.
Yes, very much so. You said something that I hope listeners caught. You said, I'm still not there. I'm okay with working where I'm at. And I think that's really, really important for people to hear, that there's not a timeline that goes with how to heal, but and everybody will have different time frames, different things that they work on. But I think it's important for them to hear, like, it's okay to be a work in progress.
Absolutely. There is no specific timeline. Everybody is different, and I don't think that anyone should shortchange themselves by giving themselves an ultimatum or saying, you know what, by 6 months I need to be over this. My parents who are great. My father, I love him dearly, but he didn't really understand what I was going through because he had not ever experienced it, or just he just didn't understand it. And it was always like, well, why can't you just get over it? It's like, okay, well, you've done all this therapy, and this time next year, you need to be over this. And it's our, you know, the way we deal with it, the way we process things is different. So I think that's very important that people you need to be kind to yourself, and you need to give yourself the space and the permission to do whatever you need to do to heal. And that includes however long it takes. Some people it takes 6 months, some people it takes a year. Some people it takes 2 years. It took me a year and a half to finally get to a place where I could take a breath and be like, you know what, the thought of her doesn't bring this pain in the pit of my stomach anymore.
I love it. Well, Brian, it is time for last call. And so for our listeners this week, what is something that they can do to be a better leader?
Well, I think something that you can do this week to be a better leader is to take inventory of your own emotions. Take inventory of, you know, your biases or your feelings towards certain things and people. Because once you understand yourself, how you feel and think about certain issues, and we say this a lot in healthcare because we deal with a lot of different, many different cultures, and you know, we need to, you know, we need to reconcile our own feelings and our own emotions. And once we do that, I think if we can do that as leaders, we can step into working with the people that count on us to and have a better understanding of who they are, where they came from. We're not all the same. And I think what that does is that cultivates a really good culture, workplace culture, because you are in tune with your own feelings and emotions and your own biases. And we all have biases about people and things. We're human. So I think that's one thing that everybody could do to be a better leader today is to just step into being able to get in touch with and reconcile how you feel and what your emotions are and how those around you affect you. Because once you are, once you're at a place of peace with that, I think it's you bring a lot more effectiveness as a leader to your team.
Love it. Well, Brian, for our listeners, how can they learn more about you, connect with you when your book comes out? Where can they find all things Brian Abel?
All things Brian Abel. Well, I do have a toxic breadcrumbs checklist that is just a really quick, nice little list of some things that hey, if you read this and you go through it, might tell you, it might give you some ideas, things to think about, and might be able to tell you if you happen to be in a toxic relationship. So you can text the word toxic to 33777, and that will give you access to this really nice, short, concise checklist that I've put together, and it'll also give you some information about how to touch base with me about my book, and it'll send you an email with links to connect with me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, and you can reply right back to the email. I do offer a coaching program for men and for women. I have devised a program that is specific to men and specific to women because as men and women we have a lot of differences, and it's a 12-week program based off of you know research that I've done and my own experiences that I've found that have really helped me heal and helped me move through this process as quickly as possible. So the first step of getting in touch with me is to, like I said, text the word toxic to 33777, and that will get you in touch with me. It'll get you my checklist, and you can maintain contact with me on socials. And like I said, you'll have my email address, and that's the best way to contact me.
Well, fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining me for a pint in conversation today. Like I said, it's as much as your story impacted me and me selfishly wanting to have this conversation because of where I've been in the last 2 years. But I know there are many listeners who've been in our shoes and want to know, like, hey, is this normal? What am I the only one? And how does this impact me beyond just the personal? How does this impact me on the professional? And I think there was a lot of great takeaways that you shared with us today. I know for me, there was a lot of great things. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, it's my pleasure. And Kevin, I want to thank you, and I want to honor you for providing and offering me some time on this space here, to have a chat with you and to get this message out. So what you were doing is very important. So I just wanted to take some time to honor you and thank you for providing this space um, for us to come on and have a pint and a conversation with you, and we hopefully can impact your listeners. So thank you for doing what you're doing. It's greatly appreciated, and it's been an honor and pleasure being here.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thank you for listening to the Leaders and Loggers podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share the conversation with another leader in your life. And if you've not subscribed to the Leaders and Loggers podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are on all major streaming platforms, or if you prefer watching our conversation, we are on YouTube. And please leave comments if you really enjoyed and this resonated with you. And I hope you will join us for another pint and conversation next week.